day before Thanksgiving in 1971, a man identifying himself as Dan Cooper bought a plane ticket from Portland to Seattle. He hijacked the plane, claiming he had a bomb in his briefcase, and demanded $200,000 and 4 parachutes. He jumped out of the plane with the money and the bomb somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, never to be seen again. The FBI claims to have investigated over 1,000 people, including dozens of deathbed confessions. In 2016, 45 years after the hijacking, the FBI suspended its investigation of the case. While the FBI is no longer looking for D.B. Cooper, there is a community of people who are trying to solve the case on their own. Welcome to the Cooper Vortex. So this is a pretty cool episode. With everyone stuck inside, we thought it would be a good idea if we could do our part to entertain some of those folks with a panel of D.B. Cooper experts answering questions about the case, discussing theories, and just hang out. Now, before you say, what a great idea, Darren, I do have to say that this was all Eric Ulis' idea, and he even organized it too, so I don't get all the credit. In this episode, we are joined by a panel of D.B. Cooper experts, all of who have appeared on the show before, so you know they're legit. We've got Eric Ulis, who has a documentary coming out on the History Channel this summer. We've also got the unofficial lead forensic investigator in the case, Tom Kay. And we're also joined by the anonymous military analyst we've had on before, who will be going by Joe during this conversation to limit any confusion that might cause at a panel of people. So enjoy this episode with my friends Eric Ulis, Tom Kay, and Anonymous Joe. Let's go ahead and get started. While we've got this illustrious panel here, why don't we start with some of the latest news in the Cooper Vortex and talk about the diatoms on the bills. Tom, can you speak to that a little bit? What was found?
Yeah,
and
the
what
diatoms. Diatoms on the bills.
Diatoms. Okay. See, that's how little I know about it. I can't even pronounce it properly.
Well,
actually,
let me interject here. It actually is diatoms, but again, this is Tom we're talking to, so it's diatoms. If it was me that found this stuff, it'd be Eric. So that's the way this shit rolls. So.
Oh, I guess so.
Yeah, well, they do the same thing to dinosaur names, you know. It should be Diplodocus, not Diplodocus, but that's how it works. But now, you know what? We should wait on the diatoms because it's kind of a story. You know, so why don't we kind of get the news and reviews out of the way first, and then I can go into that a little bit later. It's the most exciting thing that we've had come up recently, and probably the only new information on the money find ever. So that's pretty exciting stuff.
It is pretty exciting stuff.
Well, the interesting thing about this is I'm actually going to be burying some cash up there on Tina Bar, basically before May. Just for the purposes of seeing if we can actually get some diatoms on this cash, because I know Tom has really advocated a position whereby the diatoms couldn't work its way down through the sand and attach itself to any of the bills, which is sort of problematic because if you look at the other alternative, that doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense either. So listen, man, I'm of the opinion, let's just bury some cash. Let's just bury some cash on the beach. Make sure that it's low enough on the beach where come June, the water, it will be actually underwater. That spot will be underwater, which according to Tom, sounds like that's really kind of the diatom bloom season. And we'll see what happens sitting underwater there for a week or two if any of those diatoms actually do migrate down to the bills or not. So hey, Darren, before we hang up, make sure I want to touch base with you about seeing if you can give me $100 to actually bury up there. I don't want to do it with my own money. So
yeah, let me know where you're burying it to if I run out of cash. Hey, quick question for and Darren, if you need to control the time, let me know. Did you guys find diatoms on the Cooper bills recently? I know you can edit this out, Darren, if it's getting into the story. Is that how this whole thing kind of started?
Yeah, let's just go ahead and talk about the diatoms. Yeah. So, the bills have very low scientific value in general. It's not like the tie where there's stuff all over it. The tie was specifically very interesting because you never wash a tie. everything that you could have possibly left on the plane. The tie was the one thing that actually holds particles from everywhere you've been. The money, however, is a different story. It actually doesn't have that many different things on it, especially if it was in the river and the water, everything gets washed off. Well, what we found out was that there were diatoms on the money. And we knew about this from the first investigation of the money, but we didn't find a very big variety, and it wasn't a point of focus, because at that time we didn't know that much about the diatoms. Most recently, though, one of the forum members, 377, who has one of the original Cooper bills, wanted to know what was on it, quote unquote, and he allowed me to take samples off of his bill, which not many people would do out of your $5,000 bill, and look at them under the microscopes. Well, when we did that, we found this very unusual thing. We just called them hairpins at the time. They looked like microscopic, the size of a blood cell, hairpins. And then when I did an elemental analysis of it, they came out to be silica. So I put that information up on the forum, and the forum found out that it was a particular type of diatom that forms a star shape. It floats in the water, and the specific species name was Formosa. So that opened up a new line of investigation. And what we found from that is that the Formosa species blooms in June and July and is basically non-existent in the wintertime. So that just aspect offhand became very problematic, because there's a lot of theories that Cooper buried the money or it fell out of the plane and all that. But all those theories hover around the November timeframe when the jump happened, and finding these particular species of diatoms on the bill tends to point to a summer event where bills got wet and then got buried later. So what we've done recently is we've compared all the species found on the Cooper bill to money that we had dipped in the Columbia back in 2008 in November. And the species that we're finding in November compared to the ones on the Cooper bill are completely different. There's actually only one species overlaps between the two. So this gives us a good indication that there is a big difference. So we went to the literature and we found out that there's been a lot of studies on diatoms on the Columbia River. The Columbia River turns out to be very well studied, and they've monitored the species mix every month for a year. And in fact, there is differentiating species between the winter and summer. So we're looking at that. So far, that is pointing to, again, a summertime immersion of the bills before they were buried. And then the last thing that we're looking at is in the wintertime, there's different minerals in the water than in the summertime. So these minerals get incorporated into the glass diatoms. So diatoms, I should point out, are like an algae, but they grow a silica shell around themselves. And the shell is made of glass. So it has all the same constituents as the glass in your window pane.
Wow.
And incorporated into this glass is some of the impurities that are found in the water. And those impurities change summer to winter. So the summer diatoms have a different elemental mix than the winter diatoms. And we're investigating that right now. We're finding that there is a difference between what's on the bills and what's happening in the winter. So, from there's a debate as to, was the money floating around for years in the water? We say at this point, no, because you'd find the winter diatom species along with the summer. The other question that Eric had pointed out is that, can you get diatoms on the money while it's buried in the sand? Well, that's an interesting possibility, and I wholly promote the idea of burying some money, and let's check it out. But we know that the money in the sand was kind of bricked up. It was solid bricks when it came out of it. And we found at least one diatom species that was about ½ inch or more into the stack, which wouldn't make sense to get in there while the bills were buried, because the sand would be compressing them, and they form a stack after they get wet. They don't like to come apart, which was the problem with Brian Ingram. When he found the money, they couldn't even separate them back home very easily. So that's kind of where we're at with the diatoms. We're only midway through the research, but it's giving us a very interesting time frame for when the money was in the water, which we you think is a pretty certainty at this point, and then was buried. So speculate all you want. It does not look like they went straight into the ground. That unless you can figure out a way to get diatoms through the sand. And I should mention that the sand grains look like boulders to these little fragile glass diatoms. So the type of diatom that we find in the summer is shaped like a star, and it would not survive getting bashed around in the sand grains.
Okay.
Do you believe this is evidence that he survived the jump?
I don't think it has anything to do with him, because this appears to show that this doesn't show any connection so far in my mind. I have to be specific here because we're only partway through the investigation. But this would appear that someone did not walk down the beach and bury the money. It got wet first, and the bills would have had to spread out first to get the diatoms in between them. So I don't think that relates to a person at all. So I think the money, again, is a bigger mystery than the Cooper case itself. And every new piece of information we get points in a different direction, and this one does too.
Yeah, and this is one of these areas, and I know Tom and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when I was down at your place. This is one of these things that, in my mind, doesn't make any sense. And the only thing that really makes sense to me, which is contrary to what Tom is saying, is that the bills actually were buried dry. And then during a couple of high water events on the Columbia River, the money spot was actually underwater for an extended period of time, several days, and that water essentially, obviously migrated down through an inch or two or a foot of sand, whatever the case may happen to be, however deep down the bills are buried. And that accounts for the diatoms. So in other words, I'm saying I wouldn't be surprised if the diatoms actually migrated down through the sand to the bills, and that's what we're seeing. Part of the reason that makes sense to me is because if you look at historical records on the Columbia River, there were actually two high water events that took place between November 24th, 1971 and February 10th, 1980, when Brian Ingram found the money. Just happens to be that both of those high water events occurred in the month of June. One of them was more towards, I think, the middle of June. The other one was the very end of June, could have actually gone into July, which again was when these diatoms would have been blooming. So that's just a little bit too coincidental to me. But that said, that's why I'm rolling up there, taking $100 from Darren, and I'm burying it in the sand. We'll just see what happens. We'll see if this stuff shows up. So yeah, I mean, that's,
right.
That's it. I mean, that'll kind of tell the story right there. The challenge, though, frankly, I've been thinking about this, is that, burying it at a point, right on the water's edge when the water's low enough, so that obviously it actually is covering that spot when when June comes around. Because again, I guess my understanding, Tom, is what you're saying is that these diatoms would bloom in the June time frame. So contrary to what people say, to me, it doesn't seem like there's an awful lot of movement with the river. I mean, occasionally you have these high water events, but I've been to Tina Bar multiple times, and from the lowest I've ever seen it to the highest I've ever seen it, this is just anecdotal, and in different times of year, I would say there's probably a depth difference of 3 or 4 inches. That's it. I personally haven't seen any dramatic swings, but certainly there have been. So.
Yeah, well, you also get the big ships coming by and rolling waves and stuff up on the shore and things like that. So yeah. I think that, yes, a high water mark could certainly be it. And I do agree with the whole line of investigation that you mentioned. But water gets up on the sand for various reasons, like ships, probably all through the year.
Yeah, the thing, though, is that obviously the money find spot is way up from the water's edge. At least it was at the time the money was buried, and actually the time that the money was found. I mean, I think it's about 50 feet from the water's edge, and I think it's an elevation of 10, 11 feet up from the mean water level there. So that that's a significant. I mean, ships aren't going to have waves that kick up. They're not going to have those kind of waves. So that's why it's that's what's intriguing. Given we know where the money find spot actually was located, that's sort of problematic. It's very problematic, because obviously if someone advocates that it came down the river and it kind of lapped up on the beach and buried itself somehow, which of course I don't believe. It has to be a very high water event because the money was found so high up the beach. I mean, that again, there's no other choice. So, which is very, very, very limiting because there weren't many super high water events during that. It was an 8-year time period, something like that.
Yeah, well, these are all the interesting details that we need to look at in the case, try and solve it. But the money is so enigmatic. Nothing makes sense about the money. And even if everything we're saying is true, it still doesn't make much sense. It still doesn't help us illuminate how the hell the money got there,
But does it point to Cooper surviving the jump?
Well, I mean, what
I don't see a connection. But
Joe was going to say something. You're going to say something, man. What was it you're going to interject there?
Oh, my question was, originally I was wondering if it came from the Cooper money, did it come from it must come from a current bill. And Tommy answered the question. I guess it came from Mark 377. Of the 300 bills roughly that were found, how many of those are still around? I guess some went back to Brian Ingram, right? And he auctioned.
Yeah, he got half of them, from what I understand. Maybe the 302s are saying something different now, but we understand that the insurance company got the other half, and those disappeared into the ozone. So
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now Brian's still got a few left. He's been selling them over the years. He's got about 5 or 6 left, he said, plus a bunch of fragments.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing, man. I mean, like, it's just a really big ass mystery. Like, I don't know if I've ever told anybody this. I know I've told a few people this, but any of you guys that was actually in Tina Bar right before CooperCon. So this last November, I was on Tina Bar taking some pictures, doing some research or whatever on Tina Bar, and damn near killed myself on that place. There was this log that was kind of up on the beach there, but I happened, that I stepped on because I was climbing up the beach, which is very steep at that point because of the erosion and so forth. And the log just rolled from underneath me and it just threw me right up, and I fell right down on that log and damn near broke my thigh, my upper left thigh. Got a gigantic welt there, and actually did break my finger. Did break my pinky, which really still hurts. But it was, there's something about that place, man. It's just a place of mystery. I was thinking,
right.
Can you imagine if I would have killed myself or something like that there? I realized that how tenuous life is at times, man. I mean, I felt that. I'm 6'3", 220 pounds, and man, I felt every freaking pound of that as I fell down on that damn log. Is all of it centered on about 4 square inches of my leg. But
you'd be Earl Cossey if that happened, Eric.
Yeah, that's the thing. I was thinking, no shit. I could have seriously
stories from there. Yeah, people would be talking about a murder for hire or something.
Well, maybe it'll be the new TV show, The Curse of Tina Bar.
There you go. Dig that place up, see what's going on there, man.
Yeah, we'll dig for treasure.
Place. It's a fascinating place. It really
so did you see that you saw the clay layers then in the sand when you visited Tina Bar?
Oh yeah, you can easily see that. You can easily see the clay layers and everything there. And yeah, as you've noted, Joe, have you ever been out there? Have you been to Tina Bar? Ever seen that place?
I've been close. I couldn't get to Tina Bar. I'd like to on my next trip out there, but that is one place I think I emailed. I was talking to somebody about it and asked if I could drive there, and the answer was no. And I'm not familiar enough with the area that I could have found some way to kind of sneak in. So yeah, have not been there. Been close.
Yeah, I mean, you can. I mean, obviously you can drive up to the property that it's on, but that entails actually doing some walking as well. But yeah, the way to go about it obviously is to reach out to Mr. Fazio and see about getting permission there. I know he's been a little bit leery for a number of years letting people on the beach just because of the liability aspect. And I know that there have been people that have been injured on other properties in the area, and that ultimately led to them fencing it off and kind of closing it down. Then Eric Ulis rolls up and almost kills himself on the beach. So I mentioned nothing to them. Like,
Right. All
I
right.
mentioned nothing to them because I was afraid that, if I mentioned something about, getting in a fight with a tree log out there and getting, my ass whooped, I probably wasn't going to be allowed to go back there. But it's a cool, it's a very cool spot. And as the pictures of show, it's very, very different than it was back in 1980. So it's a cool spot. Definitely worth the visit.
I'm sorry, do you think there's
Go ahead,
any
Darren.
more evidence to be found there?
I doubt it because all the sand that was there for the money is all gone now.
Yeah, I mean, the beach has just been stripped away. It's just completely different. I estimate that the water level right now is about 5 or 6 feet below the where the money was actually buried. So I mean, it's. Yeah,
You mean the sandbar? You mean the sandbar is about 5 or 6 feet below where the money was buried?
Well, the money spot itself now is underwater, but the water is very shallow at that point, meaning it's about 2 or 3 inches of water. So you can actually, you can walk out there in your bare feet and literally stand on the spot, because again, it's only a few inches deep of water. But where the money itself actually was, again, the height of the sand at that point back in 1980 is probably 10 feet above the water level there. But I'm just depending upon how far down it was actually buried in the sand. And I guess obviously I'm sort of advocating a scenario whereby DB Cooper actually buried this stuff. I don't think it sat a couple of inches below the surface for 8 years. That just doesn't make any sense. But no, it's very different, very, very different.
We're also replenishing the beaches when they were dredging everything up and putting it on the beach. So I think once they stopped dredging, then the sand started eroding away, and I think that's why eventually became available to grinding just a couple inches below. But yeah, it was probably deeper than that, or it was buried shallow just before a dredging event and got buried deeper for a while. But yeah, probably did not spend its life 2 inches below the surface for the 9 years it was under there.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Speaking of the bills, Tom, I was just thinking about this. You've got a great story about this that you're going to have to tell people, because I know that, my understanding is that when the money was finally divvied up, the FBI took 14 of the bills and they kind of got first dibs, and then the remaining bills were split between Brian and the insurance company. But you told me a story, which I just think is great, about the bills that the FBI sent to you to analyze. Why don't you tell us what happened with that?
You mean you're talking about the return trip you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty funny. So the fact that the FBI even released the money to be analyzed by someone outside the FBI was just probably a first. That they would just go, yeah, sure, yeah, we'll let somebody analyze it who's not part of the FBI. I'm sure that's not standard operating procedure over there. So when we finally did get permission to look at the money was hand carried from Seattle down to Arizona here, and then an FBI agent showed up in my driveway. He was driving like a Honda, and I laughed at him. I said, "Where's the big black SUV?" He said, "We got him back at home base." He said, so he came in. He pulled out these bags that had FBI evidence on them. I still have one of the bags, which was pretty cool. And I had to sign for him and everything. So when we did our analysis and we were done with them finally, I called up the FBI and I told them, I said, we're ready to return the bills. And they weren't going to send someone down to pick them up. So they said, well, you've got an FBI office right in your hometown there because we're near the border. We actually have everything here. So it was behind Home Depot, and it was a nondescript building back there. I said, go back there and drop them off. So I went back there, and it was interesting because nobody knew what this building was. Now I did. It was a kind of just an average-looking fence around the place. So when you go through the gate, behind the fence is these 2-inch thick wire cable running inside the U channel of this fence. So somebody tried to drive through the fence, even with a semi truck, this fence would have stopped them. And I'm going, wow, these guys are pretty serious. So I go in and they buzz me into the building, and I'm in the main room, and there's like one or two guys in this huge room with like 7 or 8 desks. There was like nobody there, which was pretty wild. I thought, they spent a lot of money in this building. Doesn't look like there's actually a lot of people here. So they said, what are you here for? I said, and they didn't really know. So I said, I'm here to drop off the DB Cooper money. So they didn't really know what to do with it. They said, okay, here, give it to me. We're going to put it in the safe. So I had written my name and phone number on the folder that contained the money. And so he brought it in, he stuck it in the safe. He said, thank you. And I signed off that I delivered it. It was done. So I was kind of suspicious that nobody really knew that the money was in the safe. So 2 years later, I get a phone call, and I answer the phone, hello, and the guy goes, Mr. K, this is blah, 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 blah from the FBI. And I said, I bet I know why you're calling me. He said, you do? Yeah. He said, why am I calling you? I said, you've got some money in your safe, and you have no idea where it came from or why it's there. He goes, well, yeah, you're right. So I told him, I said, call the Seattle office, talk to Agent Ang, and he will get it straightened out. So we both had a little bit of a laugh about it. I told him it was the DB Cooper money, and I can't believe that was it. Yeah. So if you're wondering how the cigarettes got lost, that's how it happened, right? But I guess we do have a good story on the cigarettes now. But yeah, that's how things get lost in the FBI. So it was pretty funny.
Hey, Eric and Tom, off that note there must have been hundreds of people that were involved in the case through the years. Even that one person that took the money from you, Tom, and put it in the safe, and then whoever called you a couple years later. Do you expect someday that maybe when Larry Carr retires, that somebody's going to come out from the FBI and say, hey, I want to write a book. I want to talk about this. I want to bring the case back. Like, are they just really, really good at keeping secrets?
Well, Eric, you want to speak to that, or should I?
Let me think of how I can respond to that question. I don't think that they're. I don't know how to phrase it. I don't want to say that they're very good at keeping secrets. I don't think it's a matter of that they're really concealing an awful lot of stuff. I mean, obviously there's stuff that they can't reveal, but I don't think that there's any real large conspiratorial thing going on here or anything of that nature. I'll say this. I mean, obviously, I'm involved with a History Channel show that is going to be airing later this year, and part of working with the History Channel on this, we actually reached out to the FBI, and I will say, without getting too much into it, just because I can't, I will say that the FBI was exceptionally cooperative. Which I found very encouraging, because I was quite frankly very disheartened with sort of the FBI's MO, for the last several years, certainly since Tom was granted access to the evidence in 2011, I believe was the last time. So, I mean, they've just been very, very uncooperative, not providing really any kind of information about a number of different things that just seemed, I was discouraged, frankly. And then when, of course, when the case was closed in 2016 and all that stuff was shipped off to Washington, D.C., there was just sort of this looming realization that, man, probably never going to get access to this stuff again. I mean, we're in tough shape. That said, they were very cooperative, exceptionally cooperative, and worked with us with respect to this particular thing. But I don't know. As far as Larry Carr or somebody else writing a book or something at some point, seems kind of unlikely to me, but I don't know. Any additional insight, Tom, with respect to that?
Well, yeah, I would agree. If there needs to be some big reveal if you're going to write a book, and everything I saw showed that the FBI tried very hard to solve this case. When we went and looked at the evidence, when we were actually in the archive, they didn't bring us down to the basement where they store everything. And I asked Larry how much evidence is down there, compared to what you brought up. He said, well, I brought up all the physical evidence and all the information that does not relate to personal people. He said, the law binds them for not revealing people's personal information that they investigated. And I said, how many people did you investigate? He said, well, the shelves are 8 foot tall and there's about a 10-foot length of shelving that holds dossiers on everybody that we investigated. So they literally investigated tens of thousands of people, and there's the paperwork to show it down there. So if there was any conspiracy theory that said they were covering this up because it was a government plot, well, nobody told the FBI that. If Larry had some information that he's holding back, I would kind of doubt that, because he was trying to solve this case, and I think he's still interested in it. The FBI is the one that didn't want to. The FBI doesn't want to spend their time or money on it, which I agree with. You should not spend money on old cases that are useless. You should spend your money on what's going on today.
Well, and the thing about Larry too is he just piped in. As Tom knows, Tom's a Facebook friend of mine, as well as Larry is a Facebook friend of mine, and couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 days ago, something like 3 or 4 days ago. I had a post on my Facebook page which referencing DB Cooper and Larry. Essentially, I was inviting DB Cooper to come have a drink if he happens to see the post. I was smoking a cigar, drinking a glass of wine, and Larry actually piped in and said something about the fact that, if that guy reaches out to you, basically, you'd really like to have a conversation with him. So I like to, either he's playing chess at some really ultra high level here, or he genuinely has no idea who DB Cooper is. So, yeah.
I don't think the FBI is hiding anything. I'm seeing it more as if there's just one spark maybe in this case, and it starts to snowball, and it becomes more than just us that are interested, and then the people in passing that maybe find it on Wikipedia. How do you get kind of the middle group that are really excited about it? And who knows, that might tease out something. That's interesting. You're in touch with Larry Carr still, though. He's only got to be a couple years away from retirement, I'm guessing.
Yeah, he's not that old. He's not in his 60s. No, he's probably in his 40s.
And I don't want
early
to.
50s.
And just to be clear, I don't want to imply that I'm really in touch with Larry Carr. I mean, there's been a couple bits of communication that I've had with him over the last several months, but by no means am I tight with Larry or anything like that. I can't call the guy or whatever, and that type of thing. So, I mean, again, this is just referring to this one specific sort of incident thing there. But I know, Joe, that you said that, at least my understanding is you're in the government. And in the federal government, let's just kind of put it that way. And given that the FBI is obviously a federal department, what are your thoughts? I mean, you probably have a much better grasp of just sort of the nature of how the federal government works and sort of the interdepartmental politics and everything else. I mean, do you think that there's any room for the FBI maybe at some point reopening this thing based upon your experience with the federal government?
I'm in the Army, so and I'm not on the law enforcement side or special operations. So anything I've ever done has never bounced up against the FBI, ATF, or anything like that. So really, any experience I have or even comment on that would not. It just wouldn't be relevant. I do understand the bureaucracy. I do understand the financial side of it, and I know that without money or without pressure from somebody important, that this case, would not be reopened and would not get funding. It's simple as that. And also, Eric, I would say there are people out there that I think comment about the FBI and say, well, this thing's 50 years old and they've botched everything from 9/11 to DB Cooper to Zodiac or whatever. I don't know. I don't believe that. I think they worked hard. I think given what the resources they had in 1971, they did what they could. There's a few things in hindsight that if I could go back in time, I would recommend they do, outside of, obviously waiting there with agents in Portland. But my interaction with the FBI is at a very tactical level. I've friends of mine that I went to college with, people that I know as friends, and just people I interact with here in Washington D.C. at a party or something. But it'd be like asking the forward for the Knicks what he thinks about the Utah Jazz's new arena. I don't know. It's so far away. I may be a mile away, but it's could be 10,000 miles. So yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Well,
what about you, Darren? You got to pipe in, brother. This is your thing, man.
Well, speaking of having agents at the airport in Portland, we had a question from Army of Freshmen. How do you think D.B. Cooper got to the airport?
Man, who wants to take that first? I've got a pretty thorough theory, but somebody else feel free to.
Eric, I know you. First. Yeah, you definitely have a specific theory. I'm more general in that. I think I might even read that comment on Twitter. I'm not sure, but I was thinking about that. I think it was this morning. I was walking. There may be the assumption out there that he would have been seen. So if he was in a taxi or on a train or a bus, or he walked or he was dropped off, somebody had to have seen him. So therefore, his entry into the airport had to be something really unique. I don't think so. I think that, and I've done this when I ride the bus or the train, just living in a city. I've kind of, since DB Cooper, I've walked away and said to myself, okay, who did I see on that bus or that train? And I can't remember. And I think DB Cooper probably could have been standing or sitting right next to somebody. He may have had different color hair. He may have put the black dye in his hair after the fact. But outside of him having a really unique experience, say with a cab driver or a stewardess or something, I think he could have gotten there anywhere. As a kid, I was at Fenway Park, and I saw Stephen King, and I didn't know it till after the fact when one of my friends said that's Stephen King. I was not a fan of his at the time. I was too young. I became a fan later on, but I think we've probably interacted with a lot of people in our lives, and we just don't know we did it. So I think DB Cooper just kind of, however he got there, nobody noticed him. I'd love to know. I really would, but I'm not married to anything specific. Eric, I think you had something along the lines of that he might have flown in there, right?
Yeah. I've considered this an awful lot, and I've factored in a number of things. The fact that he wasn't carrying any luggage. Also know that the FBI did yeoman's work in terms of looking at Portland Airport, seeing if there are cars left in the parking lot, interviewing taxi drivers, interviewing bus drivers, restaurant people, that type of thing around there, and they came up empty-handed all the way around. So I'm of the opinion that he started his day in Seattle. I believe he started his day in Seattle, that he caught a flight earlier that morning, and there were several options. I've looked into this and flew to Portland. I think it's entirely possible that he modified his appearance in some way once he got to Portland. And probably the easiest way would be to shave. I mean, for example, if the guy had a beard, it would have been very easy for him to step into the washroom or in one of the stalls and just shave a beard. But in some manner modified his appearance, and then, obviously caught the jet and skyjacked it. And I believe that as part of this theory that because he had no luggage or anything like that, that he would have, his plan was actually to jump near Seattle. In other words, he would have ended his day right where it began. And it makes sense on a number of different levels, especially if you consider the fact, one thing that I've brought up a lot that people don't seem to really be paying much attention to, but I think it's critically important, is what would have happened if he would have had to abort. I mean, again, this guy was the second to last guy to walk on the jet. If he would have walked on that jet and the back 2 or 3 rows had a number of people sitting in them. Do you think? I just don't think that he would have tried to skyjack the jet sitting somewhere in the middle of the passengers. I just don't see that happening. So in other words, he would have had to have aborted. And so if he had to abort, he flies to Seattle. I think he says a regular passenger, and gets off the plane in Seattle. And to me, it makes an awful lot of sense that if he aborts, he ends up in Seattle as well. So he starts his day in Seattle, and whether he successfully executes the plan, he ends up in Seattle, or if he has to abort, he ends up in Seattle. Now, the one obvious thing here is he didn't actually jump near Seattle, but I think that's very explainable. So given all of that, I tend to think that he actually flew in on a different airline and modified his appearance in some manner. Like I said, probably shaved or something like that. Maybe he did dye his hair. I don't know. That seems a lot less likely, just because I would imagine you kind of would notice that. But certainly shaving would be no big deal. If he had
shaving, I never thought of shaving. That's a really good point. That if he planned it out, show up, start with a beard, and then that changes things. The reason I talk about the hair is that Bill Mitchell said that Cooper's hair was almost comical. He had it was just really like hard, heavy, dyed black hair, and that's why I wonder if that's truly the case. Then was that normal for him, or did he do that in the bathroom somewhere? I don't know, but yeah, it's like every little theory has trees and limbs, and it just keeps going and going, and that's what makes this. You can't get away from it. It's the vortex, right? So,
Tom, how do you think he got to the airport?
I stay away from things that I can't analyze. Right? I have to work with some type of evidence that points in a direction one way or another. I don't see any type of factual evidence that would seem to suggest to me one way or another. Did he drive? Did he leave his car at Seattle? I think that if you weren't checking the Portland airport by the next morning, he could have gotten back to the car and left with the car the next morning if he walked back. I don't know. Certainly he didn't plan to jump in the nighttime. He planned to jump in the daytime. Everything got delayed. He wanted to take off, I think, with the stairs down, if I remember correctly, and that would have meant he could have jumped sooner than later. He jumped fairly quickly. He didn't seem like he was waiting for much. So that, again, like you say, these are a lot of the little ins and outs of the case, and it's hard to piece them together. I think both scenarios have equal validity. He started in Portland or he started in Seattle. I don't see anything. I don't see any difference in those two scenarios, and I don't see any evidence that would be able to point one way or another.
What do you think, Darren? I mean, you've obviously talked with a lot of people about this. Any personal thoughts with respect to that?
I tend to agree with Joe. I think it would be easy to not notice someone. I mean, if you asked a bunch of cab drivers, did you take anyone to the airport yesterday, a dude in a business suit? And they'd all probably say yes. We all took that guy to the airport. So unless you were specifically looking out for him, you wouldn't notice him at all.
Well, the suit is one thing that I don't think gets enough attention. Why would he choose to jump out of an airplane in a suit, right? And that seems to be a very unusual choice. And the only thing I can think of that makes that a good choice is that he knew he was going to end up nowhere, right? If you jump out of a plane, you're not controlling really where you're not going to land next to the 7-Eleven and make the phone call. So he had to jump somewhere remote enough that they wouldn't see the parachute coming down. So he had to have some way of getting out of no man's land there and getting back to wherever it was, his car, whatever he had. And maybe being in a suit at that point was an easier way to hitchhike out. So I think the suit is an integral part of his plan. And the only thing I could think of is that it made him more easy to pick up and easy to give a good story as to why he's in the middle of nowhere. So something to think about.
Well, you bring up a good point, Tom, and I've mentioned this before, is that people have pondered what rational person would parachute in the middle of the woods wearing a suit. And I've argued no rational person I've argued that no one in their right mind would do that. There's certainly no indication that DB Cooper was somehow sort of off his rocker in light of the way this thing was executed. He seemed to be, to the contrary, seemed to be very bright, very methodical. Therefore, it just defies common sense that the guy would purposely wear a suit and jump into the middle of the woods. However, as you've alluded to, Tom, it makes an awful lot more sense if he, for example, intended to jump in the outskirts of Seattle, just beyond just beyond the Seattle region or whatever, where it would involve a walk of maybe 4 or 5 or 6 miles or something like that to get to a payphone or wherever, and then at that point call a cab or something along those lines, and effectuate a drive back to his hotel motel room, of course, if he had something like that already lined up in the Seattle area. And the other critically important thing to remember here is that at this time, if he jumps out immediately after the jet takes off from Seattle or within a few minutes, not only do the authorities not know he's actually jumped from the airplane yet, they can't verify that for at least a few hours until that jet actually lands in Reno. The other thing is nobody knows what the hell this guy looks like. There is no description of DB Cooper out there. There is no DB Cooper sketch at this point. So like I said in one of my recent YouTube videos, this guy could have walked down Main Street dressed like DB Cooper and looking exactly like DB Cooper, at least the guy that we know, and no one would have known anything. They wouldn't have recognized him because nobody knows what the guy actually looks like. So he actually has the ability to move freely, at least for several hours, completely unnoticed. No reason at all to expect that anybody's going to recognize who this guy is, unless, of course, he's walking around town carrying a big white bank bag full of, $20 bills. So that's, those are my thoughts with respect to that. So I think that actually explains the suit.
Well, I got a little commentary on the money and the bank bag and all that. Because we've never found his parachute, there's certain things that we can start thinking about 50 years after the fact here. One of them is that we never found the parachute. So that leads me to think, and this is speculative, remember, so don't hold me to the fact, that if it was me and I knew I had, like you say, he had multiple hours of freedom of movement to do whatever he wants. He's not in a particular panic to get out of the neighborhood. He would have time to take his money, take his parachute, drag it near a road, stash the money and the parachute together near a road, get on the road in his suit, get back to his car or whatever, and then go back out to where he stashed the money and the parachute, walk 20 feet in the woods, recover them both, and then take off. And that way he knew, and which he was very cautious about in not leaving any fingerprints, that he didn't leave any trace behind of where he landed by taking the parachute with him along with the money. So I think there's a good chance that happened, and I don't think they would be under any pressure to get out of Dodge at that point.
Good points. I have three theories on why he wore the suit. One, that's what he wore every day, and he was there for a conference, or he was in sales, or he did something, and it was a rumpled suit. He had a clip-on tie. I don't think he wore suits a lot, and I think maybe that was the day he'd had enough, and that's when he decided to hijack the plane. The second one would be Eric, that you brought up. It's a lot easier to catch a ride if you're in a suit. You're hitchhiking and broke down versus in whatever fatigues or whatever they were wearing in 1971. The issue with that one is if you're in a suit near Mount Hood, it's a little bit different than being in a suit near Seattle. And the third one is, it's just, I think it's cooler to wear a suit. And Eric, I think you and I might have traded messages on the Cooper forum on that. And that's a whole nother tangent. That's my whole Cary Grant, William J. Smith deal. But it's cool to wear a suit. I mean, think about it. We might not be talking about this guy if he had been wearing jeans and I don't even know what they were wearing back in 71, some shirt or something, but a suit and sunglasses and slicked back black hair, a dapper, debonair kind of cool dude, James Bond-esque. That's my number one, but there is many options.
I like that theory the best too because it's cool.
Yeah.
It is very cool. You know, the interesting thing about this, Joe, and your comments just reminded me of this, is, you know, if you consider what this guy did, you know, nearly 50 years ago, and just, I've often thought about this, what this guy's decision led to all these years later and how it's affected my life personally as well as a number of other people. I mean, none of us in all likelihood would know each other if it weren't for the fact that this guy executed this skyjacking years ago.
True.
And the thing is, you know, the reality is I've actually met a lot of very cool people and talked with a lot of very cool people that have had some sort of involvement with this D.B. Cooper case. So that's actually a very cool sort of silver lining part of this case. The other interesting thing to contemplate, just the sheer economics of it all. This guy skyjacked $200,000, which obviously the insurance company made the airline whole with the exception of the $20,000 deductible. But if you think about the amount of money that has been spent, the amount of money that has been generated in the economy, writing books, you know, filming documentaries and things of that nature, hosting CooperCon events, things like that, it's astounding. I mean, I think on measure, it actually ironically has benefited society economically just for given the amount of economic activity that surrounded this guy over the last 50 years. So it's really kind of a remarkable aspect of the case.
I agree with you 100%. Yeah. And now with this, either whatever we're going to call this quarantine or coronavirus and all the rest of it, it's like I said, Darren asked me, hey, do you have time to get on tomorrow? And I was like, yeah, you know what? I got plenty of time. I can do this 24/7 till things change. So yeah. So he's still benefiting us today, 50 years later.
Well, you guys brought up a good point about how much attention the case gets and how much money this has generated for the economy. Why do you guys think this case doesn't get the kind of attention some other cases do? When I believe this is like the greatest unsolved mystery probably of all time.
Well, it gets better when you get more detail in this case, right? It's not something you can say, hey, you know, so-and-so got murdered over there and, you know, they found her in a pool of blood. It's not easy to understand by Joe Average right away. Most of the people that are fascinated with the case get more fascinated with the more of the details that come out. Because trying to piece together the details to understand what happened is the real attraction for, I think, most people in this case that are sucked into the vortex. So that's the deal. You know, more details, better case. Most people can't sit around and wait for details.
Great way to put it. Yeah, I agree with that. It's not as sensational either. There is no murder. There is no mass murder and all the rest of it. So, but yeah, I ponder that as well. Go ahead, Eric.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm not really sure that that's even really accurate. What I mean is it does seem that more people are familiar with Amelia Earhart than D.B. Cooper. But that said, it seems like there's a lot more D.B. Cooper related documentaries. D.B. Cooper's have featured it in a lot more episodes of other shows, and there are an awful lot of books related to D.B. Cooper. And I'm not certain that there's the same number of Amelia Earhart type of things. I may be wrong about that, but it doesn't seem like it's like Amelia Earhart's running away with this thing. But I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. It's a good question to ponder. And, you know, listen, with the 50th anniversary coming up here in November of 2021, I think there's going to be a significant amount of publicity surrounding this case during that time as we lead up to 2021, which could change things as well.
Well, we also need something new. You know, I have reporters that are on standby all the time, say when something new breaks, give me a call. But, you know, if not, you know, we're not going to do something every year anymore the way they used to. So it's seen a lot of legs. You know, certainly this Cooper investigation has got a lot more legs than you'd think. And it's, you know, kept me on TV for a decade, so I can't complain much. But I think it's a great story. It's one of the few great stories that we have, and I would love to see what Cooper himself thought of it all after the fact. How would you like to be the guy that's on TV all the time and you are, but nobody else knows that? It would be a hard thing to live with, not being able to tell your story.
Oh, I think about that all the time. Was he watching the documentaries? Did he see that episode of Unsolved Mysteries? Was he reading the books about himself?
Yeah, you imagine that'd be quite a trip, huh?
Very real possibility. So I'm just curious, Joe, like, how did you sort of like get sucked into this thing, man? I mean, like, this is, I know me, I wasn't planning this. It just sort of happened. And that's the thing. I know I'm involved with this shit somehow. But how did you get kind of wrapped into this thing?
Yeah, I talked about that briefly when I was on the podcast with Darren a couple months ago. I think I was bored for a minute. I got an email from my brother, and we had watched Unsolved Mysteries as a kid, and we talked about it. And every time it showed up in the newspaper, it would come up, but I didn't have any information on it. I didn't own any books or anything, and I don't even know if I had been to the Wikipedia page. So if you would ask me 2 years ago about DB Cooper, I would be able to tell you, yeah, he hijacked a plane in the Northwest, and I probably would have said it was $200,000 and that maybe they found some money, but there's no way I would have been able to hold my own in a conversation. And I got on Wikipedia, and there's some term I forget, but if you go on Wikipedia and you start clicking the hyperlinks, you just keep going down the spiral. So you could start with DB Cooper and then go to Seattle, and then from Seattle you go into grunge rock, and now you're at Pearl Jam or Kurt Cobain or something. It just never ends. And I went into this DB Cooper spiral, and I started to look at the flight path and how he would spend the money. And I'm an analyst by trade. I'm a program analyst now, but I've studied the numbers. Tom, definitely not as analytical as you. I do like a lot of the theories in this, but that's kind of how I got into it. And I got into Max Gunther's book. I talked to Bruce Smith. I talked to Martin Andrade. I think if the first person I'd emailed was Georgia, I would have left the case immediately, because I did email Georgia at some point, and I got, obviously a crotchety response that, had that been the first response, I would have quit. But I talked to Bruce and I talked to Martin, and I was thinking to myself, wow, this is cool. I'm talking to two guys that have written books that are on TV, or Bruce was on TV, and there was always that one little nugget that kept me going. I could never get away, and that was that, Eric. I don't really have any other explanation. I'm not a scientist. I'm not. I've been a skydiver, but I'm not a 377. I don't have a 10,000 jumps or 1,000 jumps, but it's fascinating. As a kid, you kind of root for the cops, but you sometimes root for the robbers. There's an aviation aspect to it. I love aviation. The money. There's so much to it, and that's kind of that.
There is always that nugget to the case that always keeps you coming back. There's that one new thing somehow in this 50-year-old case.
Right.
Yeah, I think with me, I think the main thing that got me involved, it was mundane. Like, I can't really identify specifically what it was, but I think as I think back, I think generally the thing that got me really into this heavy, which is probably 10, 11, 12 years ago, even though I've been familiar with the case for over 40 years, I believe was probably this pop-up occasionally about DB Cooper, whether it's Dwayne Weber or whomever, was just a bunch of bullshit. And it just seemed to me that, there was just so much conspiracy and crap and just fakeness around a lot of the stuff that I was seeing in the papers and seeing on documentaries and so forth, that I just thought, this is almost a waste of my time. What the hell do these people know? I'm a pretty no nonsense kind of person. I'm not the kind of guy that's like September 11th was an inside job. The royal family killed Princess Diana. That's just not the way I roll. That's not the way my mind thinks. So I thought, screw it. I mean, there's enough information out there where, I could probably come up with a pretty solid theory myself about what happened, and probably know a hell of a lot more than most of the people that I'm reading about in the newspapers and things of this nature. And I think that's ultimately what sort of got me started. And then it became sort of like a personal challenge. Like I'm gonna figure this damn thing out. But I think that's ultimately what probably motivated me a dozen years ago.
And Tom, you got involved through the FBI, right? Or were you involved before that?
No, I got sucked into this thing sideways. I knew about the DB Cooper case, in passing. I never had any particular interest in it at all. And then I got an email from Georgia saying, "Would you be interested in analyzing the money from the DB Cooper case?" So I was a little bit flattered. I thought, wow, Georgia knew of my work in astronomy, and he knew I did this kind of thing. So I'd never talked to him before. So I was a little bit flattered, thinking, wow, they picked me out of the lineup here to do this analysis. And I said yes. I found out later that he called 10 other people in front of me, and everybody turned him down. I was the first one idiot to say yes. So so that's how I got into it, And then once things started moving, I saw that there was a lot of actual science that could be applied to the stories to see if they were right. And the first things we found out were that the FBI's theories were most likely not right. The whole Washougal washdown theory and things like that were very poorly researched. And then we went to Tina Bar, we saw the clay layers and all this, and we kind of realized that they did the best job they could back then, but being able to investigate new, come up with new information was kind of neat, and that was a lot of fun. And that's kind of what's happened. And now it's gotten very interesting lately, as I said before, with the diatoms, because that's the first new kind of scientific investigation we can do on this in a little while. So I was not I was not a fan before this. I got drawn in, I got reeled in. So that's how that happened.
Okay. Darren, what about you? I think you mentioned it before. It was Unsolved Mysteries as well.
Yeah, I saw Unsolved Mysteries, of course, as a kid, but really what got me real sucked in was Skyjack by Jeffrey Gray. I got a copy of that book, and it led me to Robert Blevins' book, Into the Blast. And so I ordered that book and then got on the forums and everything, and I was like, wow, this is a crazy world, and there is a lot going on here. And from there, I was just completely sucked in.
Easy to do.
Right.
There's something for everybody to think about here. If you're an analyst, there's something to think about. If you're a nature lover guy, there's something to think about. If you're an aviation guy, there's lots of details in this thing. And I think that's there's a little bit of appeal to everybody. You can pick which corner of the case appeals to you. And there's a lot of question marks there. And it just seems like maybe you can figure this out. I mean, it seems like it's right on the edge. And that's the frustrating part, because it seemed that way for the last 10 years to me. So that's how it goes.
It's like the ultimate riddle. And that's actually how I describe this thing, is it's very much a riddle, because, it's true. I mean, this is a real story. This actually happened. This isn't, flipping Oak Island or some crap like that. This is the real deal. And, we know, there are a fair number of little tidbits and things that we know about Cooper and what transpired and the money and things of that nature. And, it has to somehow fit together and make perfect sense. So it's really kind of like the ultimate riddle. And I think that's part of what attracts me to it as well. I'd sort of relish the challenge, the mental challenge of trying to figure this riddle out, how this whole thing fits together. And I relish the opportunity to try to come up with ways to kind of squeeze out more and more data or more and more information related to the case. I'll give you an example. One of the things that I'm working on right now is and I'm going to be launching here pretty soon, and we'll talk about it later, or you'll hear about it later on, but it's basically, I call it a DB Cooper Bill Initiative. And specifically offering up $25,000 to the first person who can actually come up with an actual DB Cooper $20 bill outside of one of the ones that was found on the beach. And the rationale behind it was this. I started thinking that if this money actually was spent, if DB Cooper actually did spend this money, there was a very good chance that some of that money, some of those bills are still in circulation today, believe it or not. So I actually started looking into this. I contacted the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, and they actually supplied me with a number. They actually had a precise number of the number of $20 bills in circulation at the end of 1971 when this thing took place. And it was also armed with the knowledge that DB Cooper was handed 10,000 $20 bills. So, basically applying in math and everything to it, I realized that essentially 1 out of every 100,000 bills, $20 bills in circulation at the end of 1971 was a DB Cooper $20 bill. And then I started looking into how these bills end up getting eventually pulled back into the Treasury and destroyed and replaced by additional currency, and analyzing sort of the trends and how that all works and everything. What I ended up coming to, this realization that I ended up coming to, was that if DB Cooper actually spent all of that money, somehow or another it re-entered circulation, that today, 2020, today, there would be approximately 50 of the original 10,000 bills still in circulation. So my thought is, you know what, why not enlist the public, encourage people who happen to have an older $20 bill, Series 69, 63, one of the DB Cooper series, and get them to, come to a website, run the serial number through and see if it actually matches. Now, one of two things is going to happen here. Either there's going to be a shitload of people that come to the site and put in serial numbers and that kind of thing, and nothing matches, or something's going to match. Obviously, if we find so much as a single bill in circulation, well, that puts an end to the discussion of whether or not DB Cooper lived, I believe, because there's one that was actually spent. But likewise, if, for example, you get 100,000 individual serial numbers that are run through the system for appropriate bills series, and none of them match, then you could start applying some math to this. Joe, you can appreciate this. You can start applying math, given, again, the realization that 1 out of every 100,000 $20 bills that time was a DB Cooper bill. It's mathematically more likely than not that if you get 100,000 trials, 100,000 people punching in 100,000 different serial numbers, there's a reasonably good chance that one of those numbers would be a DB Cooper $20 bill. Certainly, if you get 200,000 or 300,000 people worldwide that are made aware of this, DB Cooper Bill Initiative, there's a very real possibility that one of those 50, if there's 50 out there, would pop up. Of course, if nothing comes up, then that gives you a pretty good idea that the money actually wasn't spent, which means it's probably still out there somewhere. So that's part of it too. I think that's what's part of intriguing about this case, is trying to outsmart, try to figure out what we can do now, how we can kind of get clever to squeeze out, affect information, affect data about the case.
I think that's awesome. I get a couple comments on that. I'll donate to the $25,000 pool. It's not going to be much, but maybe every little bit counts. I like the analytical approach to it. That was, like I had said earlier in the podcast, I looked at the flight path because there was a lot of math involved with that in terms of distance and altitude and winds and everything else. But I also looked at the money, and you and I can connect offline, Eric, if you do go ahead with that, because I've gone on, I think it's check6.com when I first started, and you can input serial numbers and see if you have a DB Cooper 20. And I think I remember actually finding a serial number of a real DB Cooper 20, and I put it in and it didn't come back for some reason, and it could have been, user input error. But and I could talk for a while on this. I'm just going to try to quickly summarize it. The Tina Bar money find is intriguing. I've studied it. I've looked at it. It's always interesting to me. I don't feel like I can add a whole lot to that. However, $10,020 bills likely left that airplane. They did. They left somehow. Now, there's some theories that maybe the stewardesses took a little bit, but let's assume that 10,000 bills went out with DB Cooper. Only 300 were found at Tina Bar, roughly $6,000, maybe a little less than 300. So there's $9,720 bills that went somewhere. They could have been buried. They could have. I don't think they stayed in the river. I feel that they went home with DB Cooper. Now he may not have spent anything. He may have said, "Hey, I'm good. It's a victory. I don't want to get caught." But that's a tough one for me to believe. You've got all that money and you don't spend a little bit of it. So I do think he spent it. I also believe that those bills could have been doctored just a little bit if he wanted to. He could have taken a 63A series and erased the A with just a little bit of nail polish remover, and or he could have changed the 8s to 3s or the 3s to 8s. There's all sorts of different little things that could have been done. And what I'm leading to is, I think that may get the public behind you. I think there'll be some 20s, and there's going to be some people putting their numbers in. I would say that if someone comes close, if they have the matching serial number, but it's a 1963 and not a 63A, or they have a serial number that's very close, but it's off. Instead of an 8, there's a 3, or there's a 3, there's an 8, and it's within that. I think that we'd have to find a way to capture those, because if he doctored the money, there was one suspect was a counterfeiter. I think a counterfeiter could have done that. I know some people believe he just spent it because the casinos and the banks were not looking for the money, but that's a big gamble. And you do talk about the finding the bills. There's something called a hypergeometric distribution, which is you sample a series of numbers, and you if there's 1 million bills out there, and all you need to do is find 120. One $20 bill satisfies your requirements. You don't need to sample all $1 million bills. All $1,020 bills. You only need to sample a very, very small amount, because at some point you're going to get to such a high probability that you'll likely find a bill. It kind of goes along with the birthday problem. You'll see it on Wikipedia. So I think that would work. I wish we could have done that in 1971. I think they would have found bills. I think if the FBI had maybe an operations research analyst on the payroll right then, they could have done that. They could have just gone after San Francisco Federal Reserve $20 bills of these series, and I think they would have found that these bills were in circulation. That's awesome, Eric. I'd love to see that happen. It'd be great.
No, I think it's again, it's one of those sort of a no lose situation, because my estimates, as I kind of applied the math to it, I estimated that 0.5%, approximately 0.5% of the $20 bills that were in circulation in essentially January 1972 are still in circulation. So you're talking about 1 out of every 200 roughly, and that's why you come up with there'll be something around 50. Now you can pull out the $6,000, you're talking 49. But it's obviously not an exact science, but I did research and I did look at circulation levels and how these things get replaced and all that other kind of stuff. So again, in all likelihood, it's almost certain that if indeed the full amount of the money was spent, that there would be something mighty close to 50 of those bills still hanging out somewhere today. Someone's piggy bank, something. There's still going to be around there somewhere. And the cool thing about today, this is where time actually helps us out, is that we have things like the internet and optical reading devices on cell phones and things like that. So, it's very easy for someone realizing there's a $25,000 reward out there if they happen to find a bill, to look and see if they happen to have an older $20 bill snap a picture on their phone, send it in, and you know, can be optically read, or perhaps it's you know, there's some mitigation levels or things put in there that account for something like you said, Joe, where maybe the number is very close and you want to just be certain that somebody didn't slightly alter the serial number. Those are all things that can be done. But yeah, I think
awesome.
I think it's
That'd be
very
great.
cool. So
Plus, it could bring out the gal who has that 20 her grandpa gave her, who he said it was from the hijacking.
the gal who has the $20 bill that grandpa gave her that's from the hijacking.
Right.
I didn't hear about that one.
Yeah, that's new to me too.
Yeah. I do have the guy that's got the trunk in his attic, though, that belonged to Cooper with the parachute in it. So I got that guy. So he's out there.
Yeah,
I think that's fantastic. That could you raise a good point. You can really narrow it down and just say, hey, if you have a 1963 or a 69 series, you know, then send it to us. Take a picture, and we'll give you a gift card. And if you do win, we'll give you $25,000. Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's very creative. That's a good way to actually, you know, get some facts about the problem. Because that's what we don't have. We don't have enough facts about the whole situation. This would generate more new actual facts. Bravo.
Yeah.
So, you know, that brings me to something I want to relate to you about the rarity of the D.B. Cooper case. Because, you know, if you look at the popularity of Oak Island, which never actually happened in D.B. Cooper, I was approached by some producers several years back, and they said, well, we'd like you to do an investigation. You can pick whatever you want to do, but it can't be D.B. Cooper. Right. So that set me on a you know, a chase to try and find a D.B. Cooper equivalent type of case. So here's the problem. It had to be a case that was old enough that modern forensic investigation wasn't used on it, but young enough that there was still evidence around to analyze. And this turned out to be a real problem. And actually, I couldn't find anything that was at all interesting that met those requirements. Eventually, I came and kind of thought, well, I'll investigate the Nazi gold train. But they said, no, you know, we want you to keep it in this country. So that kind of gives you an idea about how rare the Cooper case actually is. And that's one of the reasons why we can work on it, because what was done in 71 was not equivalent to the types of things we can do today. You know, as Eric just mentioned, you know, let's put out a reward to have people automatically, you know, enter their numbers on the internet. That wasn't possible in 71. So, yeah, if you guys come up with anything similar to Cooper, I'm interested, but they're very, very few and far between.
Wait, I'm more fascinated with why it can't be D.B. Cooper. If I was producing TV shows, it would be the opposite. I'd say you can do anything you want as long as it's D.B. Cooper.
Well, you know, everybody's looking for the next Oak Island, right? That's the thing with these producers. They don't really much care what they're doing their show on. You know, they'll be on to something next week, which is one of the problems why the fact we don't usually get really good documentaries is because there's rarely any science people actually involved in writing the story. Usually the science guys are called in after the draft is written and they need you to fill in this 5-minute blank. So, yeah, that's what happens. But I haven't found any good ones yet. But Cooper remains king of that type of show.
Yeah, I agree with you. He's a very unique individual. It's a very unique subject that kind of checks a lot of boxes, and it's clear to me that there's a significant appetite for the right type of Cooper programming. You know, that's just the reality of it all. So, I mean, the whole thing that triggered. Well, actually, let me just step back here. Joe, were you ever approached by anybody, producers or anything like that, to maybe explore the prospect of a documentary or anything based upon your work related to William Smith?
No, not that I can think of. I think he's too new. Maybe I brought him the first public. There's a little bit on Twitter, I think, but the first public announcement of William J. Smith was November of 2018 when Doug Perry did an article in the Oregonian. So that's, I mean, what is that? We're talking less than 18 months ago. So no one, you know, I've had a few people say, hey, I'm doing a podcast, but yeah, there's been nothing. I've never have been approached. I think it's I guess he's too new, or maybe it's too crazy of a suspect. Yeah. The answer is no, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's part actually what makes it somewhat salient is the fact that it's not your run of the mill guy, somebody that we've heard about 1,000 times before, what have you. I mean, that's just been my experience, because what triggered all of this stuff for me was the Doug Perry long form article that he wrote about, my work that's centered around not only Sheridan Peterson, but also Bachelor Island. My whole belief that the true and flight path was what I describe as the Western flight path. And I know when that article ran, all of a sudden I started getting phone calls from production companies, and I was actually awakened at 2:30 in the morning by a company in London saying, "Hey, you thought about this?" So I actually fielded a handful of people calls, and I was very particular. The thing that I said is that, yeah, I'm interested in exploring something like this, but I'm not interested in something that's sensationalized. I just don't want to go there. It's got to be legit. That's it. It's got to be legit. I don't give a shit that much to see my face on TV where I'm going to sell my soul. It has to be legit. And so I ended up settling with, working with one production company based in LA, and Tom probably knows the process. You kind of put together the sizzle reel and you go out there and pitch it and everything else. And it's all about the pitch and everything else. And getting something greenlit is next to impossible. I don't know what the odds are, but it's extremely remote. But I actually was part of the pitch process. So I actually flew out to LA, and the very first company we pitched it to is History Channel, and within a few weeks it was greenlit. So it was a very rare situation to have that happen. But yeah. So yeah, I was kind of wondering if your experience was at all like mine, because again, it was Doug Perry's article that actually triggered that for me, and I suspected it was going to happen. I actually kind of knew in advance that when that article came out that I was probably gonna effectuate some outreach on the part of some producers and that type of thing. So
yeah, I think Tom, you mentioned you got reporters that are kind of waiting for something new, and there may be kind of a sense of malaise out there that every now and then there's a Cooper suspect that shows up, and everyone says, "Well, we keep hearing about this." I did notice, Eric, when that article came out about you, what made it different. You've had a suspect, right? And he's an interesting guy. And all these suspects are interesting. I think the public is more, they want to hear more about the CIA Walter Recca than they do the railroad worker William J. Smith. However, it seems like the threshold was crossed when you came in and said, "Look, I'm gonna go out there. I'm gonna investigate Bachelor Island. It's never been done before." So from a TV producer standpoint, they can say to their boss, "Hey, this isn't just a new suspect. We're breaking new ground here. We're doing something different." And I haven't really pushed William J. Smith. I float him out there here and there, and I'm definitely not the Rackstraw group. I don't have the money or the time, and I'm not. My trade is not TV. It just isn't. That I watch it, but that's not my business. I'm happy doing what I do. I also there's things I haven't done yet. The William J. Smith family has not weighed in at all. I haven't asked them to. No one's asked them. I was just about starting the process of maybe trying to kind of figure a way to politely get them involved. My understanding is they're a good family. There's nothing there's nothing negative about them, so I'm very aware of that. Obviously, right now, I'm not gonna contact anybody during this whole coronavirus mess. But it is interesting to see which suspects get traction, which don't, and for what reasons. The whole Walter Recca piece was, yeah, it's fascinating. Somebody that worked for the KGB, but I mean, I work for the government, and I know that that's a complete hoax. So if Walter Recca lied to his friend, and then his friend told whoever, his friend was telling the truth as he knew it. So he's going to pass a lie detector test, right?
Yeah.
But anyhow, I think it's good. I'm looking forward to the HBO show and then the History Channel show, Eric, that you're having in July. I think those will be good, even just for visibility. So
Yeah, it'll be really good for the case to have both Eric's documentary come out and that BBC HBO one coming out later also.
Yeah, but the BBC one didn't. They talked to me on occasion. They were going to have me on. They didn't seem very sophisticated. I think it sounds like they're introducing DB Cooper. It's not a. It didn't sound, from the little I talked to them, very in depth. They ended up just using some of the pictures from our website. So I'll be curious to see how that one comes out.
I'm curious also. I mean, just being aware of all the people in the Cooper community. You know, it seems like they interviewed an interesting group of people. I think it was Blevins, the Foremans, and a couple of interesting DB Cooper in the media personality also.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like a real serious investigation into the Cooper mystery to me. But, a lot of times these things are focused on the people aspect, so they want to hear about all kinds of suspect stuff. So you get most shows are focused on some kind of suspect.
Yeah, my understanding is that HBO show is sort of just revisiting kind of just the case as we sort of know it, almost as if somebody opened up the Wikipedia page and worked off of the suspects that are listed on there, and it's just sort of, it's probably meant for individuals who are not very familiar with the case. Just sort of it's just sort of an introductory type of thing, and focuses on or at least mentions, I should say, some of the suspects that we've all heard of before. So I think that's it. With my particular thing, it breaks a lot of new territory, breaks a lot of new ground, and so that's it's going to be very different. It's going to be very different. Nothing like it, and so. I'm just very much looking forward to getting out there as well, and I think people will be surprised and impressed with a lot of what comes out. But hell, that's easy for me to say because I'm involved with it. But
hey, Eric, I got a question for you. Larry Fishburne is hosting that, correct?
Yeah,
Lawrence Fishburne.
Lawrence.
Yeah,
Larry. Yeah.
He's doing what they call the tops and tails. In other words, as you kind of come in and out of commercials, that kind of thing, he kind of sort of reintroduces the show or what's going on at that moment. The actual narration of the show is me, which I actually like a lot because, like, for example, if you look at the History Channel special from 2016, you had sort of that commentator, narrator guy that was kind of providing sort of the roadmap for what was going on with Billy Jensen and all those guys investigating. But in this case, I'm actually the one narrating it, which I think is important because it's centered around my work, my research. I mean, what it is that I'm looking at, and helping explain the conclusions and stuff that I've come to. And there's an active element. There's actually a search that takes place and everything else. But as far as
Great.
Lawrence Fishburne, he's just bringing the show in and bringing it out in and out of commercials and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Did he welcome you to the real world?
This must be some kind of Matrix kind of thing or something.
Yeah, you haven't seen
cultural
the
pop
Matrix?
reference we're too old to understand, probably.
I don't understand it. Yeah, what's there? Maybe we're all too old.
You guys haven't seen the Matrix?
Yeah. I call them Larry because of Apocalypse Now. I think that's what they and I'm not that old. I've heard him called Larry Fishburne, but most people know him from The Matrix now that I think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess we're all too old for that, Darren, man. So
I can't believe you guys haven't seen the Matrix.
Well, I've seen it. I love it. I love it.
Seen all the Matrixes.
Yeah.
The multi-matrix.
We're living it. We're living in it right now. I don't need to see it now. So.
Yeah, that's true. But I've got another question for you guys from Patrick, and this is something, Eric, you might be able to speak on. But Bruce has talked before that they were serving drinks on the flight to calm people down, and a cowboy got out of hand. And Patrick wants to know if you know anything about the cowboy or anyone else that interacted with Cooper during the flight.
A cowboy, and they were passing out drinks on the flight. Oh, not because they're being hijacked, because they're being delayed. That's why.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I've heard that, and there was actually something in the FBI files. I'm trying to remember. There was something in the FBI files that referenced. I don't want to call it an altercation, but some sort of something. So, and the way the FBI files describe it, I can't remember the exact terminology used, but it is an overstatement to suggest that there was any kind of conflict at all. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I live in the real world, man. I mean, I look at the documents, I look at the evidence. Obviously, there's contradictory evidence here and there in the files, and you got to be careful of that. But I haven't seen anything that's legit. I haven't seen anything that suggests that there was, basically Cooper was close to coming to blows with somebody. Like, I just haven't seen that. I know that there was something that happened, or somebody mentioned something, or somebody stepped in some way, Cooper or something, but I don't recall it ever being a very big deal. As far as serving drinks to calm the passengers down, that's just horse shit as well. Like, they may have been serving drinks to some of the passengers. I don't know, but nobody needed to be calmed down. Nobody knew the damn jet was being skyjacked. I mean, you talk to anybody and they say, with very few exceptions, they had no idea what the hell was going on. They just knew that it was taking an awful long time to land. And then once they actually walked off the jet and were met by, FBI agents, then they realized what was going on. But it wasn't like, the whole jet was aware that there was this dude in the back, rolling with a bomb or something like that. That's just horsecraft. And unfortunately, there's an awful lot of that sort of misinformation and mischaracterization out there.
Yeah, one comment on that. I definitely have never seen that in the 302s. I've never seen it. I don't think I've ever seen it in a book, but I do remember hearing about it, because when I spoke to Bruce Smith when I first joined the case, he originally one of the earliest things he said to me was, "What you're reading is not everything." And he talked about, I don't know if he talked about the cowboy. He talked about the drinks, and he talked about more going on the flight than was ever published. I don't know where he got that from. I trust Bruce, like all of us do. We'd have to maybe follow up with him. I don't know what the source is for that, but he definitely has information on that, and that's about all I could say on that. So, but there is a lot of disinformation out there, or false information. Disinformation indicates that somebody's doing something on purpose, but I did hear about it. I've never read it, though. I've read the 302s. Eric, you've read a lot more than I have, but I've read quite a bit. I've never seen it.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing about it, and it's sort of the inconvenient truth about a lot of this crap, is that we're actually getting the files. We're reading this stuff now. I mean, we're reading what the FBI was actually communicating during that time. So again, when Bruce says something like, you're not getting the full story, the implication is that the FBI is holding something back, whatever. I haven't seen it. Where is it being held back? Where is it? There's nothing there that I've seen. I mean, the FBI files, we're up into, 1981 right now with these FBI files. The money's already been discovered on Tina Barr. And I've seen nothing, absolutely nothing at all. And multiple 302s from Tina Mucklow and others. And you would think that if there was some sort of like serious come to blow kind of a situation there, that would have been reflected by someone, one of the flight attendants, not a peep, nothing at all. So, again, I live in the real world. I just don't believe it. It's just another one of these attempts, I think, to sort of throw a little bit of conspiracy and spice things up when it's really wholly unnecessary. I mean, the case is cool enough and interesting enough as it is without having to have other things kind of thrown in the mix.
Yeah, I agree. You raise a point. Bruce may not have had all the 302s at that time. There's been a lot released since his book came out. I've always wondered, though, Tina Mucklow spent a lot of time with D.B. Cooper, and all we have is the 302s. And the first time I heard about a 302 was from the movie The Town. It takes place in Boston. There's this one little part that mentions it. And the next time I heard about a 302 was during the Supreme Court hearings for the nomination of Justice Kavanaugh. And there was this belief that the FBI would return a verdict on yes or no, whether they should have Kavanaugh as the judge. But what they said was they would give 302s, and the 302 was a summary of an interview with whoever. And we have that from the case. If you look at the files that are out there, the majority of the files are about suspects that were investigated. If you pare that down to just 302s on the actual flight, it's a very small percentage of all the FBI information. And what I wonder, I've wondered this, and no one's been able to answer the question: was Tina ever recorded? Was Florence Schaffner ever recorded? Were the pilots? Alice Hancock, or were these simply interviews and then the agent summarized it and returned a 302?
There were no recordings that we saw.
Okay.
And we would have seen that. We saw a lot of details of that nature. So, and the thing that we learned about dealing with the FBI is that if the interview was non-productive or the investigation turned up no evidence, they wouldn't talk about it. In other words, there's no entries in those 302s that say, well, there may be some, but for the most part, if they went somewhere and investigated something and it didn't produce anything, there wouldn't be a report about it. So sometimes negative evidence is important, especially in science. Our research in science, negative evidence is very important, and that doesn't seem to be the case with the FBI. So they did more work than actually shows in the 302s, but a lot of it was dead ends.
Makes sense. Absolutely. Yeah.
Let's talk about something we touched on real brief there, and that's misconceptions in the case. What are some of your the misconceptions in the case that frustrate you the most? People come up to you and say, I know this about the case, or I bet D.B. Cooper hid in the plane when it landed and then got off. Tom, why don't we start with you on misconceptions people have on the case?
Well, I'm going to paint this with a really broad brush then. The thing that bugs me is that everybody's got a suspect, right? So everybody starts with a suspect and then looks into it and finds things that connect their suspect to the case. And I think it's a good idea, don't get me wrong, because that's the only way you investigate these suspects. If we did it enough, eventually we're going to find Cooper. The other side of the coin is, and what we try and do, is we come up with some facts that kind of fence him into a particular area, given the titanium and rare earth elements and things like that on the tie. What I would like to see is people say, well, given these constraints, what suspect fits those categories, or where should we look for a suspect to do that? Currently, one of the things I think is important is the Tektronix possibility, because they made CRT tubes. They had rare earth elements there. That type of thing. Where the titanium comes in is not so clear with Tektronix, but that's how I'd like to see. There's a misconception that if my father or my brother or somebody looked like Cooper, then he must be Cooper, right? And that happens all the time. So that would be my pet peeve.
Joe, you want to take the next shot at it?
Yeah, sure. There's a bunch, but I'll throw a couple quick ones out there. I think the one that gets to me the most would be that he died in the jump. And although that's a possibility, I don't think it's probable. And I probably believed that at the time. So that would be the big one. There's just so much evidence. I'd say evidence is the right term. There's information out there that would indicate it's more likely that he survived. There's no body was found. The rest of the bills weren't found. There were, I think, 5 copycat hijackers within 7 months. They all survived. Most of them jumped under much worse circumstances. So that's probably the big one for me. And literally in the past 2 weeks, Wikipedia finally changed it was the second paragraph that said all the evidence basically points to DB Cooper dying in the jump. And so this was on there on Wikipedia for I don't even know how many years. But the footnote, the source for that was an FBI website. So what we have is Wikipedia saying DB Cooper died in the jump. For proof, go to the FBI website. Well, of course, the FBI wants us to believe that he died in the jump for many reasons. So I'm not saying it's a conspiracy, just that it's not a neutral comment. There's a lot of information out there that would indicate that he survived. So that's my big one. The second one would be, and it goes along with the suspects, in that I wish the public would look at some of these suspects and just say, and I'm specifically speaking about Rackstraw and McCoy. All the witnesses said that Cooper was middle-aged, and whatever middle-aged means, it was somebody probably late 30s, 40s, 50s. McCoy and Rackstraw were both 28 at the time. They were both military veterans. They were likely in good shape. They were thin. They had their hair. There's no way that these three stewardesses, Alice Hancock, Florence Schaefer, and Tina Mucklow, all in their 20s. I've never seen a picture of Alice. I don't think I have. I have seen Florence and Tina, and they were beautiful women. And there's no way they would have mistaken a 28-year-old for a 45-year-old. I wish that happened. I'd love to go back and be mistaken for a 28-year-old. It doesn't happen. So that would be that's another fallacy. So I would say the belief that he died in the jump and the belief that he could have been 28 years old. You don't mistake a 40-year-old for a 28-year-old. You just don't. It doesn't happen. So that's my 2 cents.
I would definitely agree with both of those. What about you, Eric?
I think the thing that probably is the most frustrating to me is this tendency of people to gravitate toward some sort of conspiracy of some shape. You know, the CIA is involved, or some black ops guy. You know, they know who the real Cooper is, but he knew too much, so they got to cover it up. All this other kind of crap. That's just sort of nonsensical rubbish that it just seems like invariably in any kind of case where there's any kind of mystery, you know, people just can't seem to accept the fact that, you know, we just don't know. They've got to have some sort of explanation, and government's the easy thing to pick on. It's got to be some secret government operation, what have you. I mean, the truth of the matter is, like, how this guy got away was he caught them off guard. He jumped from the jet. They didn't exactly know when he jumped. They weren't certain he actually jumped for multiple hours till the plane actually landed in Reno. And he was just one step ahead. I mean, by the time they showed up in the general area, he was long gone. And that's just simply it. I mean, you know, the guy didn't have to be some black ops guy. It doesn't have to be some huge cover up. President Nixon was not involved with this thing. You know, it's really nothing more complicated, in my opinion, that it's some guy who possessed some knowledge, possessed some skills, got jammed up somehow, decided, you know what, I'm going to skyjack a jet and try to extort $200,000. And he was one or two steps ahead of the authorities. And that's it. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's very, very well put. Very well put.
So you don't like Howard Hunt as a suspect?
Right. Howard Hunt. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I have this kind of thought every once in a while about Cooper, that when we do catch him and we start interviewing him and he says, what happened? He goes, well, you know, I just was pissed off and I went to the hardware store and I bought this stuff and stuck it in my briefcase. And I figured either I'm going to die or I'm going to jump out of the airplane with the parachutes and live. And I didn't think much else about it. And it just all worked out, you know.
Right. Yeah.
You know, I think it's going to be really funny if at the end of the day, this was just the guy rolled the dice and won and became famous in history for it. You know, it would be hysterical. But
it reminds me of some of the suspects that you know I've read about in the FBI files. I mean, some of the comical crap. I think my favorite one, and I've talked about this a couple of times, is the FBI files. There's this one guy who reaches out to the FBI and he says, I know that I've been under surveillance by the FBI. I know you guys think I'm DB Cooper and you're collecting this file and everything on me. And I demand that you turn over to me everything, all the information you've collected on me while you've investigated me as DB Cooper. The cool thing is that you can see all the FBI documentation between, other agents in the FBI, and they don't know who the hell this guy is. The guy actually wasn't a suspect at all. But given that he's writing to the FBI thinking that he is a suspect, he then became a suspect and they investigated the guy. So we actually brought on an investigation by virtue of insisting that he knew for damn sure that the FBI was looking into him. But I love that story because there's just so much of that kind of stuff in these files. And some of these characters
can add to
are
that.
remarkable.
Yeah, I can add to that because we were there. He pulled out all the letters that were sent to the FBI after the fact, and it was the funniest thing we read because there would be one letter that says, screw you, I'm on a beach drinking margaritas, and then the next one would be, I want to return the money. Please let me know where I can bring the money back to. Things like that. They went both ways. There was about a dozen letters, and they all had crazy angles to them. About half of them were, I got away with it, ha ha ha. The other half were, oh, I'm really sorry, but I needed to do it, and it was for my family or something stupid like that. So it was amazing how many crazies there were out there.
Wasn't there? There was one that somebody was watching Perry Mason or something, and in the jury box, the guy looked like DB Cooper. Yeah,
that's right.
Oh,
yeah, one
God.
of the supporting actors on TV looked like the sketch. So the freaking dude actually contacts the FBI and says, "Hey, man, there's a supporting actor on this Perry Mason episode. You may want to check him out." Some of the stuff is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be amazing if the guy actually was DB Cooper, though? But yeah.
It kind of gets me in that if there's a lot of good, I'd say good suspects out there. They at least check a lot of blocks. I think a lot of them. Darren, you've had quite a few on your podcast, and I don't necessarily say if I prove somebody wrong that I'm right. It doesn't make my guy the DB Cooper, but I feel like if we had all shown up 20 years ago, we would have probably sat down with the FBI and at least pled our case. But you can't even get attention now for all the research that you've done. The FBI doesn't even respond, even if you ask them to. But yet you see a guy that looks like DB Cooper on a Perry Mason show, and they actually research it. It's crazy. So, Darren, what do you think? What's your one that gets you?
The one that bothers me the most, I kind of touched on it, is that he hid in the plane and just walked out. Or that there was no DB Cooper at all, and the flight crew made that up completely. And that's why we've never caught him, is because DB Cooper never existed. Those are the
That's
two.
Good. I hadn't even heard that one. That's a really good one.
Oh yeah, and those always come from the same people. We'll all be at a dinner party or something, and it'll come up. Hey, I do this podcast about DB Cooper, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I know about that. Here's what I think. I think he hit on the plane," and then everyone just walked away, and then he casually walked out of the plane with the bag full of money and his bomb. Or the other one is, oh yeah, the flight crew, they did it. And it's just like, have you looked into this at all? There's no evidence to support either of those.
Exactly.
Well, that's, this Cooper covers the entire range in 360 degrees. that's you can find any angle you want in this investigation.
Yeah, I'm also fascinated by, there seems to be a new trend in the unsolved cases world where you just combine them all. So all of the unsolved cases, they're all connected to a single thread or a single person.
Zodiac or Unabomber, yeah.
Everybody was Cooper.
Right.
Yeah, one guy was one guy who did it all. This one genius of a guy. So
Ted Cruz, yeah.
Yeah.
I've stopped commenting on those, but at least it keeps his name in the news. But some of those are ridiculous. Yes.
Well, you got to expect that. It all comes with the territory, And then, no matter how scientific, I had a whole great scientific theory about silver on the bills, right? That I went on TV about and had scientific evidence to back it up. And it turned out I was 100% wrong. Couldn't have been more wrong, So everything can turn around on you. So, you got to take the good with the bad and all these things.
I think that you bring up a good point, Tom, in that that's one thing I would like to see a little bit more of in the Cooper world is people that approach this thing a little more scientifically and are willing to cut bait when they need to on suspects and theories and things of that nature. It just seems like too often you find people that get married to a particular theory or suspect, and they just cannot divorce themselves of that, regardless of what the evidence shows. And, obviously I've been very attached to Sheridan Peterson as a suspect. I've publicly said, I think there's 98% certainty that he's D.B. Cooper. Now I say 98%, not 100%. And the reason why is because I'm honest. I'm like, I've never been able to find the silver bullet. There's a couple things about the guy that, that sort of bother me, with respect to him being Cooper. I've never been able to determine if Sheridan Peterson smoked. Sheridan Peterson had mighty thin hair on the top of his head. There are a couple of things like that. But it just seems like there's too many people getting out there that are just absolutely certain that they know who the person is, just no doubt about it, even though the evidence speaks to something entirely different. And all I can say is it's a good thing that people design airplanes and surgeons and things of that nature. It's a very good thing that that's not the way they approach designing airplanes and building airplanes and surgeons. Otherwise, we'd have an awful lot of plane crashes and flubbed up surgeries and things. People have to rely upon the facts, like it or not. And if something, the example you gave about the silver, Tom, if something comes out that illuminates the fact that there's something's wrong here, people just need to cut bait. They need to cut bait and move on and start looking in a different area. And it just seems, again, that too often people are unwilling to do that. And, I've said this many times before, I don't have a horse in the race. I have no horse in this race other than the truth. And that's the God's honest truth. I entered this thing years ago looking to establish the truth, period. Not to put somebody forward as D.B. Cooper who actually isn't D.B. Cooper. So,
yeah. But again, I'll reiterate what I've always said is that we do need people to champion these suspects, right? Because without a champion, a suspect will never get analyzed. So let's analyze them. And then, if a lot of these guys like Rackstraw were dismissed instantly, they didn't take more than 20 minutes of investigation to dismiss them. And that's still put out a 2-hour documentary on it. But let's look into it. Let's look into it. We got more evidence now. We know clearly we got the 302s backing us up now. So just narrow them down quicker. That's all. But I do think it's a good idea to investigate all the suspects. But, it's Joe Weber being an example. She will fight to her last breath that her husband was D.B. Cooper because he said so on his deathbed. And she's caused more problems for the Cooper case than anyone else. So there we are.
Yeah. And, the one thing that people seem to forget, and I've mentioned this a couple of times before, so, hearing this may sound familiar to some people, but there are a lot of people that seem to not realize that they do not get to determine who D.B. Cooper was. They do not get to determine what happened. They don't get to determine any of this stuff. This stuff was decided 50 years ago by the real D.B. Cooper. The real D.B. Cooper is the guy who decided that he was going to be D.B. Cooper. He's the guy who decided how he got out of the area or what happened. None of us get to choose that or decide that. But a lot of people seem to forget that and somehow think that it's their job to advocate and build a story telling us all what actually happened. That's not an appropriate place for these people to live. Again, that stuff was decided 50 years ago by D.B. Cooper himself, and our job has to be to read the tea leaves, look at the evidence, and try to decipher what it is that D.B. Cooper himself decided to do and actually effectuated 50 years ago. That's not my job. He already decided that for me. I'm just trying to figure out what his decisions were.
Yeah, and I think sometimes there's, unfortunately, when people come in with a new suspect, I think that it was, Billy Bob that pulled off the hijacking, and then they're just met with this avalanche of negative comments about it. And I think that sort of damages the community. You know, like you're talking about Joe Weber. There's a group of people who are combative and confrontational about the whole thing.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, Darren, that unfortunately you've got a few bad apples in the DB Cooper world that want to talk about everything but DB Cooper. They just basically want to attack. They want to smear. They want to bring other people down, which I just don't understand that. I've never understood that. But unfortunately, you've got a few of those people out there, and I know it turns an awful lot of people off. And Joe himself said right here, hey, if he had talked to one member in particular right off the bat, he would have probably been immediately turned off and haven't gone anywhere with it. But fortunately for him, he happened to talk to Bruce Smith, who's a very pleasant person. And this is the interesting thing about Bruce, is that Bruce and I are probably as far apart in this case as two people could be. I mean, I'm much more buttoned up, conservative, sort of really purely like trying to focus on the facts and what does that tell me and everything else. Bruce is much more, hey, it's the black ops kind of thing. There was some government cover up going on here. What was the FBI really trying to accomplish here, whatever. But I have never had a single cross word between Bruce Smith and myself. And it's because we're civilized. And unfortunately, there's an awful lot of people on the forum that aren't. Well, let me rephrase it. I won't say an awful lot. There are a few that aren't. And unfortunately, that it tends to jam out and crowd out a lot of people that just aren't interested in, being smeared publicly just for the hell of it. So.
Yeah, it's not awesome. How do you guys think this case will get solved? What is it going to take?
I'll jump in. I've been saying this for a while now, and I think there's a better chance of solving it now than 15 years ago. And the reason is somebody probably knows something. This whole thing didn't happen in a complete vacuum, just one guy operating alone. Somebody knew something. And I believe that somebody is not going to come forward and say anything if Cooper's still alive. So we have to wait for him to die, and then that person will be motivated. If the person's still afraid of repercussions from the FBI, they still won't come forward. But in talking to the FBI, one of the agents said, well, we probably wouldn't convict them anyway because, we don't convict 80-year-old guys who are going to die in court. So I said, well, why don't you put out a thing saying anybody coming forward with information will give you immunity? And he thought it was a good idea, but the boss didn't, so it didn't happen. But if that were to happen, if whoever knows something comes forward right now, that could crack things really wide open. So that's how I think we're going to see a big breakthrough in the case.
Yes, and if you know anything, please reach out to me before contacting the FBI so we can have you on the show.
I've got, in general, I agree with you, Tom, on that. The only thing I would question, though, is if Cooper was 40 in 1971, that means he was born in 1931. He'd be a very, very old man right now. And just by probability, one would say that he's not alive. But I definitely agree with that, though, in the sense of I used to think that once Cooper died, then there was no crime left. No one would get in trouble for it. And I think the FBI went as far to say is the statute of limitations ran out on the accomplices. But we're in the society we live in now of lawsuits and tax evasion and everything else. I wonder if there are still trickle down effects of the Cooper case, in that if some of that money went to a beach house or a boat, or someone heard something and didn't say something about it, could the IRS come after the family? Could the FBI come after the family? Could Florence Schaffner sue the estate of Sheridan Peterson or Walter Recca? I don't know. And I just wonder if, even if somebody wanted the attention of saying, hey, my father was DB Cooper, I can prove it, I've got $20 bills or whatever, I still think there would be some concern that they'd end up in a courtroom and they'd be paying lawyer fees and innocent as can be, but still losing money because of it. Yeah,
I can't argue with that at all. You're probably 100% correct on that. Yes, there could be someone just going to hold back just for the aggravation. I probably would, right? If I actually had real info, I probably wouldn't do it unless there was a big carrot at the end of the stick, which there isn't. So yeah, but that's still my hope, right? I'll hope like everybody else.
I think you're right, though. You said it right at the beginning. The first thing you said was somebody knows something, and there's got to be people out there that know. How do you keep this a secret? I mean, this is not a war crime or something. I mean, this is something that you want to tell your buddies about, or at least your wife. His wife knew he was gone, or his girlfriend, or his kids, or something, and that had to have trickled out somewhere. And maybe it'll get tracked down somehow, and somebody will come forward and say, yeah, you know what, he did. He mentioned that in a bar in 1982, and I didn't believe him. I wish I had.
Yeah.
My thing would be, I wish the DNA would come out a little bit, but there was an article a couple weeks ago about the FBI not even willing to look at DNA from it was a multiple murder case. I just don't have a lot of faith that the DNA is ever going to do anything unless we get hold of it. So, and that assumes that Cooper left his DNA on the plane, but I hope it gets solved. It's going to be a tough one, though.
I think my opinion is that this will be solved, and I think science is going to solve this. It's clear with science advancing as rapidly as it is that it's hard to envision, what's just around the corner in terms of scientific technology and so forth. And when you consider, things like, outside of the FBI's evidence, the tie and all that other kind of stuff, when you consider, the parachutes and things like that, which could be out there, or an attaché case or whatever, there may be a very real chance that science lends a hand in actually finding some of this stuff, or in some other fashion identifying, closing in on who DB Cooper is. So I think that science is going to play a big part, and I think there's a very good chance that at some point, eventually, we're going to be able to figure out precisely who this guy was, and prove it. I mean, obviously, there are a lot of people under suspicion, but it's that proof, that silver bullet that just seems to, just be ever so close, but not quite there.
True. Yeah, it's got to be proven.
What I'm most afraid of in the case being solved is that we find out who it was, but not the story. And I want to know exactly the whole thing, from the time he woke up that morning to jumping out of the plane, where he landed, what it was like, where he went, and the years after that. If we find out that it was Tom Franklin who did it, but with no details, I think that would be so much worse.
Yeah, well, maybe that's where we should leave it, right? We should leave the discussion right there.
Don't ever solve it. Yeah, we don't. Yeah, that would be kind of awful if we found out who it was, but he didn't tell anybody. He didn't write it down, and we don't know. Man.
Yeah, then what?
Then I guess that's it, man.
They'll just argue that he's not the guy.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing. We got a fair number of flat earthers around here still. You could come up with absolutely concrete information or evidence impugning somebody or pointing to somebody, and it's it's inevitable that it's part of this master conspiracy. Evidence was planted, that type of thing. Yeah, so. Right. But again, I live in the real world. I know that Tom and Joe live in the real world as well as Darren. And I think we'll just let the evidence speak for itself and tell the story. And like I said, I think science eventually is going to step in and play a big part in ultimately solving this thing.
I hope so. I'd love to know exactly what happened.
Oh, heck yeah, yeah.
Well, that's why we're all in it. Well, thanks, Darren, for having us.
It was my pleasure, guys. I appreciate you all coming on, and Eric for organizing this.
Well, like I said, my thoughts around this were really pretty simple. A lot of us around the United States specifically are stuck at home, spending an awful lot more time at home than we want to be, watching TV, and it's all centering around the coronavirus, obviously. And I know that there are artists and other people, comedians and so forth, that are stepping up and putting out content that's of some entertainment, some value to help get people's minds off of what's going on right now. And thinking about it, I thought, why not we do the same thing? Let's get a few of us together who are kind of plugged in and a little bit better known in the Cooper world. And, let's talk about the case kind of in a BS laid back kind of sense, and put something out there for people to listen to, a couple hours on the podcast and listen to. The whole idea being that it'll be a small respite, small break from sort of the goings on today. And to the extent that we're successful with that, I think we can all feel proud about, lending something to society, helping out society in some small measure, if only for a couple of hours, getting people to think about something other than the coronavirus.
Yeah, you can get at least 50 years entertainment out of this.
There you go. Still going. Hopefully the coronavirus will go less time than DB Cooper.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me on. I think Bruce was supposed to be on, and I got called up from AAA, like I said earlier. But I like talking to you guys. I like talking about the case, and to talk to people that I have never actually, like I said earlier, Tom and Eric, I've never physically spoken with you. Darren, you and I have met face to face. Definitely appreciate it. So I hope there's some traction that comes out of these podcasts. Yeah,
and hopefully you could make the next CooperCon.
Yeah, when is that? Is it before Thanksgiving? It's like 2 weeks before. Yeah.
It's the weekend before Thanksgiving, and so basically it's going from Friday, November 20th through Sunday, November 22nd. Again, that's the weekend before Thanksgiving, with the main sort of presentations and that type of thing taking place on that Saturday, November 21st. It'll be in the Portland, Vancouver area. If you want to obviously attend, you can do it incognito. I mean, you can just be someone in the audience. You don't have to participate or what have you. But just let me know or let us know, and I'd love to have you there. And this is going to be, this year is going to be very cool. It's going to be a much bigger event than the first two. And so I'm very much looking forward to it, and it's going to be a lot of new cool stuff that'll be taking place. And again, it'll be in the Portland, Vancouver area. I don't know yet precisely where it's going to take place. I'm still considering a few options here, but it will be a lot of fun.
It's good that we're talking positive about the future, as in this will happen in November. There'll be travel and everything else. So I'm gonna have a lot of pent up energy. So I'm gonna catch up on some travel that I'm not able to take because of this whole mess. So yeah, that'd be good.
And then, did you have an air date for your documentary, Eric? Can you say that yet?
Sure. Yeah. Right now it's scheduled for July 5th, 2020. So that's the date right now. Obviously, if something changes with that, I'll let you know. But July 5th, 2020 is the air date. It was originally scheduled for July 12th. That's what they were thinking, but they moved it up a week to July 5th. So
right on my birthday.
Oh, 5th of July. Well, there you go. Happy birthday in advance. So, but so that's it. And it'll be a 2-hour special.
Hell yeah, we look forward to it. Anyone else have anything to promote?
That's for me.
Nope, nothing else at the moment.
All right, well, thanks for coming on, guys. I really appreciate it. July 5th, mark it on your calendars. Not just because it's my birthday, but because that's when Eric's documentary premieres on History's Greatest Mysteries on the History Channel. I'm sure you've seen us share his DB Cooper YouTube videos on our social media pages too. Don't forget to visit dbcooperhijack.com and follow our anonymous friend on Twitter at DW011. Delta Whiskey November Oscar November Echo, then the number 1. Very confusing Twitter handle, but great Twitter page to follow. I follow it. Thank you to Eric Ulis for organizing this. Thank you to Tom K. and Anonymous for spending a Saturday on the phone with me. Thank you to Russell Colbert for honoring promises I made for him without his knowledge. I'm Darren Schaefer, and thank you for listening to the Cooper Vortex.